France, 1431. The 100 Years' War still rages across muddy fields and broken villages. Cities rise and fall like breath, and in Rouen, a city held by the English, an extraordinary trial is about to end. Tomorrow morning, a 19-year-old girl will be burned at the stake. Her name is Joan, and the world will never forget her. But history has always remembered Joan from a distance, etched in stained glass, painted in gold leaf, made into a myth. Tonight, that story turns its face away from the crowd and toward the shadows. Because tonight, you are not Joan. You are no warrior, no saint. You are a hungry, nameless peasant woman imprisoned for stealing bread. You expect to die alone, but the cell they throw you into is already occupied. And across the straw-covered floor, shackled in iron, sits a girl who says she hears the voice of angels, and she wants to talk to you. If this quiet moment speaks to you, if you believe forgotten voices still deserve to be heard, we invite you to subscribe to our channel. Leave a like to help us keep telling stories that history tried to silence. Now rest your eyes, breathe slowly, and listen, because tonight the shadows are yours. The torchlight flickers dimly down the long corridor, its flame caught in the sheen of wet stone and rusted iron. Somewhere far off, boots echo like slow, hollow drums, and the groan of a door heavy with age and sorrow swings open, spilling torchlight across the mildew-dark floor. You are dragged forward, not roughly, but with that weary violence only the law can afford. The guard does not curse or shout. He only grips your elbow in silence, the way one might grip a sack of spoiled grain. There is nothing personal in it. The corridor grows colder as you descend, the air growing thick with the breath of centuries. You count the turns by instinct, not sight. You know dungeons like this, not because you've been in one, but because you've always lived close to their shadow. Born near the courts, but never inside them. You've swept the steps outside a bishop's hall. You've begged for bread beneath a steward's window. You've stitched the hem of a page's surcoat, once, when you still had 2 good fingers and 1 bad idea. And now you are nameless again. Not because you were famous before, don't flatter yourself, but because the guards didn't ask your name. They called you she. They called you thief. They called you another mouth. All because of half a crust, stale and wet with gutter water, pulled from a baker's back step before dawn. A crime too small to matter, and yet too real to be ignored. There is no trial for the likes of you, only doors that open, and then close. Tonight, it is the door that opens. The hinges scream softly. You're pushed into a cell that is already full of silence. The guard doesn't speak. He slams the door behind you, and the flame of his torch vanishes around a corner. You blink in the dark. For a long time, you hear nothing but your own breathing and the slight rustle of straw. Then a shift, barely audible. A chain scraping the stone, gently, as if moved by breath, not body. Your eyes adjust slowly, like old leather drying in the sun. There, in the far corner of the cell, is a girl. No, not a girl. Exactly. A young woman, thin, pale, her face lit faintly by the moon that sneaks through the high, barred slit above. She is wrapped in a threadbare cloak, her feet bare, her wrists shackled loosely by iron rings. Her hair is uneven, as if hacked off in haste, and yet beneath the dirt and shadow, something like discipline clings to her posture. She doesn't move when you sit. She just watches you, eyes wide and unblinking. "You're the bread thief," she says, eventually. Her voice is tired, but not mocking. If anything, there is wonder in it. You nod. "And you whisper?" She smiles, slow and strange. "They call me witch, heretic, soldier, saint." You think she is mad. Many here are. But she continues with a clarity that surprises you. "My name is Joan." You blink. You've heard it. Of course you've heard it. Even the peasants speak of her, the Maid of Orleans, the girl who led armies, who spoke with saints, who rode in armor and carried the king's banner. A dozen different Joans, really one for each kind of rumor. A devil woman, a blessed virgin, a cunning liar, a puppet, a saint, a fool. And now, she's here, in chains, and you of all people are sharing her cell. She shifts slightly. Her chains clink again, but softly, like wind chimes smothered in mud. "They'll burn me in the morning," she says, just after the bell. You say nothing. What could you say? She doesn't seem to mind. Do you know why? You shake your head. She smiles again, but it's smaller now, sadder. "They say I wear men's clothing, that I call myself chosen, that I speak to angels." A pause. "They asked me to take off my clothes, to dress like a woman, but I would rather die like this." You look down at your own rags. Nothing feminine about them either. Still, no one has lit a pyre for you. She sighs. "I once wore armor, you know, real armor, not like the ones in paintings. It itched, it pinched, and it never smelled clean." A pause. "But I liked the weight. It made me feel like stone, like nothing could cut through." You imagine her then, small and shining, riding through smoke and banners. "You believe me?" she asks suddenly. You blink again. "Believe what?" "That I heard them. Saints. Michael. Margaret. Catherine." You hesitate. Your instinct is to lie, to nod and mumble. That's what people like you do around those who talk to voices in the dark. But something about her gaze it is too still to lie to. "I don't know," you admit. She smiles at that. Genuinely. This time. Good. A rat scurries along the edge of the straw. You both ignore it. "You smell like firewood," she says after a while. "I slept in a chimney last week." "That'll do it." She leans back against the wall, eyes half closed now, as if the cell is a quiet cottage and you are merely two women resting after market. "My mother had a garden," she murmurs. "It grew lavender. Not much else." You hum, unsure how to reply. "I used to talk to the herbs," she adds, and for a moment, you think she's joking, but she's not. They don't answer, but they remember. You almost ask what they remember, but she is already moving on. "Do you know what it feels like to carry a banner?" You shake your head again. "It pulls," she says, "like it wants to fly away, like it doesn't want to be held." Her eyes flutter shut. "They gave me a sword, too. I never liked it, but the banner they said it was beautiful. White silk, fleur-de-lis, Jesus and angels." You can't help but ask, "Where is it now?" She shrugs. "Some bishop has it. Or maybe it's already burned." Silence returns. Not empty, but full like a pause between two verses. "Do you have family?" she asks softly. "No." She nods. "Me neither. Not anymore." The air grows colder. Through the barred slit, the stars begin to blur. Clouds drifting in. Somewhere above, a bell tolls once. Not morning, just midnight, passing through the world like a ghost. She doesn't sleep. Neither do you. At some point, she begins to hum a tune you almost recognize, a peasant's lullaby, perhaps, or something older, from the churches that wouldn't let you in. You lean back against the opposite wall. Watch her. Listen. And for the first time in days, the hunger gnawing at your belly eases. She speaks once more before dawn. "Will you remember me?" she asks. You nod, without hesitation, this time. She does not smile, but her head dips forward, and her fingers, bound though they are, press against her chest as if to hold the memory in. Then the light shifts. The sound of boots again, doors, keys, and a voice, low and firm. Time. You both rise. You do not realize it, but your hands are trembling. The cell has no windows. Only that single bar slit high in the wall, useless for light, impossible for escape. Still, you notice the sky has changed. The darkness now carries a hint of color, not quite morning, but close. The kind of light that reveals more shadow than it dispels. The straw at your feet looks grayer, the walls more uneven, as if the stones themselves have aged overnight. Perhaps they have. Perhaps they too have heard all the confessions, screams, prayers, and bargains whispered in this place. You wonder if the stone remembers the voices better than heaven does. Joan stands. Her chains scrape against the floor as she straightens. Not proudly, not defiantly, but deliberately, as if even this small act must be done with purpose. Her ankles are bound in rusting iron, her wrists too, though with enough slack for limited movement. And yet she carries herself with the strange composure of someone who has been judged already, not by men, but by something larger, and no longer fears what man can do. You remain sitting, not out of fear, but paralysis. What are you supposed to do now? This is not your morning. This is hers. You were merely placed in the same cage for reasons neither of you controlled. And yet, she looks at you again, and her eyes, deep as cathedral ash, ask something of you, something more than witness, something less than absolution. She tilts her head slightly. You still haven't asked me why. Why what you murmur. Why I did it. Why I left home. Why I said yes to the voices. You hesitate, and she notices. Do you think I wanted war? She asks, her tone gentler than the words suggest. That I dreamed of killing. You lower your eyes. You don't know what you believe anymore. Belief, you've learned, is a luxury. Peasants survive on practicalities. Weather, coin, firewood, silence. She sits beside you now, slow and careful. Her back pressed to the same wall. There's barely space between you. I was 13 when I first heard it, she says quietly, as if speaking to the wall, or the cold air between your shoulders. I was alone in the garden. The air had gone still, like before a storm, though there were no clouds. And then she pauses. I heard a voice, not like a person, not outside me. It was inside, but louder than thought, and kind, So kind. You glance sideways. Her gaze is unfocused, eyes seeing things long past. It called me by name, Jean. She says it in the old tongue, soft and round. It said I was chosen to lift France from despair, to save the Dauphin, that I must ride, that I would lead. You almost laugh, not from mockery, but from the sheer strangeness of it. She's so small beside you, so ordinary. Her hands are blistered, her nails dirty, her breath faintly sour from days of poor food and no water. And yet she speaks like a prophet, like a queen in disguise. I didn't believe it at first. She continues, but it came again, over days, then weeks, and every time it came with peace, like being wrapped in linen after a fever. You think of your own childhood. Did anything ever speak to you once? Maybe, when you fell into the river and nearly drowned. You remember a strange calm, a softness, but you were pulled out too soon to know if it meant anything. Joan stretches her legs as much as the shackles allow. Everyone thinks the king sent for me, that I walked into his palace and demanded an army. She smiles faintly. No, I begged. I pleaded with knights, lords, monks. I walked barefoot for days. Most of them laughed. Some threatened to whip me. One told me I was possessed. You nod slightly. That sounds more like France. But I kept walking, she says. And then one believed. Why, you ask? Why would anyone believe? She shrugs. Because I looked him in the eye and told him something no one else knew. A secret about his wife, buried for years. He wept. And he gave me a horse. You're not sure whether to be impressed or afraid. I was not meant for the sword, she says. I barely held one until I was in armor. But I could speak. That was my blade. Words. Certainty. You nod again. That much, at least, is believable. Her voice is not loud, not grand. But it is clear. Like spring water running over stone. The kind of voice that cuts through shouting simply by not joining in. She closes her eyes briefly. I led them to Orléans. We won. Not just because of me, but they thought so. The men said my presence made the wind change. The cooks said their pots boiled faster. The archers said their arrows flew straighter. She opens her eyes again. They needed a miracle. I looked like one. You notice the way her voice drops on that last word. Not bitterness, more like quiet grief. Then came the coronation. The Dauphin became king. He kissed my hand before all of France. And when I asked for more soldiers, when I asked to push onward, he said no. You frown. Why? Because he had what he wanted, and I was no longer convenient. She looks at you again. Do you know what it feels like to be set aside by someone you lifted from the mud? You do. Not in palaces or battlefields, but in kitchens, in barns. You've fed mouths that later spat at you. You've nursed sick elders only to be shoved aside for younger help. You've raised children who forgot your name. Yes, you know. Joan smiles again, this time with some strange companionship. They captured me near Compiègne, she says. I was trying to save a town. The gate closed behind me. My horse fell, and they took me, sold me to the English. And now, she gestures at the chains. Now! The word hangs like smoke. She grows quiet. You hear her breathing, shallow but steady. You realize her hands are folded loosely in her lap, as if in prayer, but her lips do not move. Instead, she watches a single spider crawling across the stone. You follow her gaze. The creature makes its slow journey toward a crack in the wall. It disappears without fanfare. You whisper, without thinking, "Are you afraid?" She shakes her head. Not of the fire. You know what she means. Not the pain, not the smoke, but the moment before the silence, before the flame. She turns slightly toward you. But I do worry that I won't hear them again. The voices. She nods. What if I misheard? What if I imagined it all? What if there were no saints? You're not sure what to say. And then you find yourself speaking, though the words surprise even you. Even if you were wrong, you gave people something, hope, a face to look to, a story. She looks at you for a long time. Then she nods. "I'll take that," she says, even if the voices were only echoes. A sudden sound, footsteps outside, a clink of keys. Not yet time, but near. Joan stands again. She walks to the far corner of the cell, kneels, and begins to hum. This time, it is no lullaby. It is a church hymn, barely remembered but haunting. You recognize pieces of it from distant masses, from the way drunk priests used to sing when no one watched. You do not speak. Instead, you watch her sway gently, as if carried on some invisible tide. You are reminded suddenly of a story your grandmother used to tell of a girl who sang in the woods and made wolves sit still. You had dismissed it as a fable, but now you wonder. Maybe it was a memory. Joan opens her eyes. "Will you come with me?" You blink. "Where?" "To the courtyard," she says. "They'll ask you to watch." "Why?" "They always do. They like to fill the square with faces. It makes the judges feel brave." You hesitate. "Do you want me there?" She shakes her head. "No. But I want you to know you have a choice." A strange thing, to be offered choice in a place like this. She walks back to you, slowly, reaches into the folds of her thin cloak, and pulls out a scrap of cloth. At first, it looks like a rag, but when she places it in your palm, you see it clearly, a faded ribbon, soft and frayed at the ends, once white, now tinged with smoke and sweat. "I used to braid this into my hair," she says, "before the helmet, before the court." You stare at it. It's not beautiful, but it is real. "I want you to have it," she says, in case no one else remembers. You nod, almost ashamed to touch it. Then more footsteps, louder this time, voices, commands. Joan looks toward the door. "They're early," she says. "Or perhaps I prayed too long." You stand. "Because it feels wrong to be sitting now." She faces the door with her chin raised, not proud, but whole. When it opens and the guards step in, they do not speak to you. They take Joan by the arms. She does not resist. But just before she crosses the threshold, she turns back. Her eyes meet yours, and with a smile that is neither brave nor afraid, she says, "Thank you for listening." Then she is gone. The door doesn't close all at once. It swings slowly, creaking on its rusted hinges, as though reluctant to seal the darkness behind her. The torchlight from the corridor pools in for a few final seconds, just enough to cast Joan's shadow on the far wall, long and elegant, like a saint's silhouette in stained glass. Then it's gone. The iron slams shut, the lock clicks into place, and the dungeon exhales once more. You remain where you are, staring at the space she once stood in. The smell she left behind still lingers in the damp air, a mix of sweat, smoke, and something else, like dried lavender from a forgotten garden. The ribbon sits in your palm, crumpled and absurd. You try not to crush it, not to drop it. It weighs less than a breath, yet your fingers ache from holding it. Outside, the sound of boots fades. One set, then another. You listen for the bells. Joan said they'd ring. But there is only silence. Not for long, because silence, like straw, catches fire easily. You move to the place where she knelt, the edge of the cell where the stone dips inward and moisture gathers. You half expect to find some imprint of her, a warmth, a mark, a final message scratched into the rock. There's nothing. Of course, she was not here long enough to leave a mark. But then again, neither were you. Neither is anyone in this place. That is the cruel joke of dungeons people enter as bodies, leave as smoke. And yet, something shifts within you. You realize you're no longer counting time by hunger or thirst. You're not even thinking about when they'll come back for you. Instead, your thoughts spiral backward, not forward, replaying the way Joan hummed in the dark, the way she tilted her head like she was listening to something only she could hear, the way her voice never trembled when she said, "I'm not afraid." Who says that? Who truly says that and means it? You rise and walk to the wall where the ribbon now hangs from a crack in the stone. You've twisted it gently, tucked one frayed end into the jagged crevice so that it doesn't fall. You're not sure why you did that. Maybe because it feels wrong to pocket it. Maybe because it should be seen. Or maybe, in the deepest, smallest part of your mind, you believe that if anyone ever comes to this cell and finds it, they'll ask who left this here. And maybe someone, someday, will tell them. The bells begin to ring. You don't flinch. They toll slowly, long, deliberate, almost mournful, not the fast, panicked clang of alarm, not the delicate shimmer of vespers. These are execution bells. You've heard them before, once in Paris when a woman accused of sorcery was dragged through the street in chains. Then again outside Le Mans when a deserter was flayed for show. But this toll is different. It doesn't rush. It doesn't shout. It listens as it rings, as if the bell itself wants to remember what it marks. The guards will come for you soon. You know this, not from any direct command, but because Joan warned you. They like a crowd, she'd said, especially a quiet one. And you, what are you now? Not a thief, not a prisoner, not quite a mourner, something stranger, something unnamed. When the keys rattle again, you don't move. You let them open the door. You let them gesture. You let them grumble and curse about lazy women, slow feet, empty minds, and you follow. The corridor is even colder now. The torches offer no warmth, only the illusion of light. You count the steps as you walk, not to memorize a path, but to ground yourself, to make sure you're still flesh and not drifting smoke. It's strange, being led like this. Last night you were thrown. Today you're escorted. Because today, you're part of the performance. The execution yard is not large. It sits behind the courthouse in Rouen. a crooked rectangle of trampled dirt surrounded by stone walls. No grandeur, no architecture, just enough space to accommodate death without interfering with commerce. The people have already gathered, some because they were summoned, some because they smelled spectacle. Merchants, butchers, masons, a bishop or two, their sleeves freshly pressed, and soldiers. Of course, always soldiers. Some hold pikes, some hold ropes. All hold silence. At the center of the yard, the pyre has been built. It's not tall, not like in the paintings. Just 3 layers of wood stacked around a thick stake, straw and pitch clump at the base, waiting to take the flame. There's a bucket nearby, not of water, but of sand, for the soldiers' boots, not for mercy. Joan stands already chained to the post. Her arms are bound behind her. Her hair has been shorn again, this time unevenly, so that patches of scalp gleam under the pale morning sun. She is not in armor. She is not in peasant rags. They've dressed her in something that was likely meant to resemble a robe, but it clings like a sack, awkward and unfinished, a mockery of both royalty and repentance. Her face is calm. Not smiling, not weeping, calm. A priest stands beside her, mouthing prayers. He holds a crucifix aloft, angled toward her as if it might deflect what's coming. You doubt she's looking at it. Her eyes scan the crowd. You try to hide in the back, but it's no use. She sees you. Her gaze doesn't linger, doesn't plead, doesn't accuse. She just sees you and nods. It is the smallest movement, barely visible, but it makes your breath catch. The priest speaks louder now. His Latin cuts through the yard, syllables sharp and cold. He names her sins, her heresies, her refusal to wear women's dress, her insistence that angels spoke to her, her crime of leading men into battle, her presumption to crown a king. Somewhere near you, a boy laughs. You want to slap him, not because he laughed children laugh, but because no one silences him. The wood is lit. Not all at once. First a corner, then a base, then a torch brought forward by a man with shaking hands. He doesn't look at Joan. He only looks at the flame. It catches. The fire grows fast, too fast. It finds the pitch, licks up the straw, begins to bloom upward. Joan closes her eyes. You cannot hear her over the crackling. You do not know if she screams. The wind shifts. Smoke sweeps across the yard like a veil, stinging your eyes, filling your mouth. People cough. Some step back. A few cover their faces. You stay. You stay even as the air thickens, even as your stomach twists and your knees tremble. You stay until the fire dies. When it is done, they rake the coals, pour water on the embers not to cleanse, but to cool the ash. The stake still stands, scorched and blackened. No one touches it. The priest is gone. The soldiers murmur. Some say nothing. The crowd begins to thin. The bishop signs something to a clerk. The boy who laughed begs for bread from a merchant. Life tilts forward. Always forward. You are the last to leave. Or rather, the last to be told to leave. A guard nudges you. You look up. Your face is streaked with soot. You hadn't noticed. You follow the guard back into the stone corridors, back down the winding path, through iron gates and corridors lined with forgotten names. They do not return you to the same cell. This one is smaller. No ribbon on the wall. no voice in the dark. You sit. You do not weep. But you do not sleep either. Not that night. Not for many nights. You hold the ribbon to your chest and whisper her name. Not for memory, but for proof. You lose track of the days. At first, they pass like slow drops from a cracked gutter drip. Drip, each one nearly indistinguishable from the last, but soon even the drops disappear. The guards no longer open the door with urgency. Meals, if you can call them that, arrive late, and sometimes not at all. You're not sure whether it's punishment or indifference. Perhaps it doesn't matter. In a place like this, there is no clear line between one and the other. Time unravels into a dull fabric. You measure its length not by daylight, for there is little of it, but by smaller things, the sound of rats scrabbling in the dark, the way your feet feel heavier each morning, the soft ache in your stomach that never really fades. You speak less, even to yourself. Words feel too sharp now, too loud in a place that has gone so quiet since Joan's fire. But something else happens. Slowly, imperceptibly, like a thaw beneath frozen ground. You begin to listen, not just for guards or footsteps, but deeper, for the murmurs in the stone. You listen for the faintest echo of that voice you heard in the dark, the one that told stories of angels and kings, of battlefields and banners. You know Joan is gone, ashes scattered, bones burned beyond remembrance, but the sound of her remains, in the rhythm of silence, in the texture of air. You listen not for her voice itself, but for the space it used to fill. And sometimes, just sometimes, you almost hear it. They come for you eventually, not to execute, not to pardon, to move. No one explains why. No one meets your eyes. A guard simply unlocks the door, gestures with 2 fingers, and walks away without checking to see if you follow. You do, not because you trust him, but because sitting in that cell another day would be like trying to relight a burnt wick. They move you to a room above ground bare, with high walls, and a window barred but open. You blink in the daylight, unsure whether to welcome it or fear it. The sun hits your skin like a stranger's hand, warm but unfamiliar. You squint, then sit in the corner furthest from the light, letting your eyes adjust. It's cleaner here, less damp, less rot, but quieter in a different way. Here, silence does not suffocate, it echoes. You don't ask questions. You've learned by now that questions are a kind of currency, and you have none to trade. That night, you dream for the first time in weeks. Joan walks through fire, but it does not burn her. Her feet pass over coals, and lilies bloom behind each step. She carries no sword, no banner, only a loaf of bread in her hands. She looks at you and says nothing, just holds it out. You wake with the taste of ash and flour in your mouth. You begin to speak again, not aloud, not at first, but in the corners of your mind where memories speak to themselves. You tell Joan what happened after she left, how the guard with the twitch in his eye was reassigned, how the priest who lit her pyre was seen limping days later, as if the fire had kissed his own foot. You tell her that the ribbon still lives, though you no longer wear it in the open. You've sewn it into the hem of your shift, close to your ribs, where no one can find it but you. Weeks pass, maybe more. Then one morning, a knock at the door, not a guard's knock, but lighter, more uncertain. When it opens, you expect another prisoner, but instead, A young woman stands there, her eyes wide and unsure, her hair tucked under a scarf too fine for a kitchen maid but too plain for nobility. She doesn't speak at first. She holds something in her hand. A letter. She offers it to you. No seal, no wax, just folded parchment, smudged at the corners. You stare at it. She says, "They told me you were with her on the last night." Her voice is tremulous. She is barely older than Joan had been. You nod. Did she say anything, the girl asks? Anything about what comes after? You want to lie, to say that Joan spoke of heaven, of forgiveness, of gardens full of light and singing saints. But you remember her words, her fear that the voices might never return, her confession that she might have misheard. So you say she hoped? The girl blinks and nods. Then she presses the letter into your palm and walks away before you can ask who sent it. You don't open it. Not yet. You hold it in your lap for a long time, watching the way the afternoon sun drapes golden bars across the floor. When you finally unfold it, the handwriting surprises you. It's too careful to be common, too imperfect to be noble. The words are simple. To the one who listened. They say history belongs to kings, that saints are only saints if the church approves. But I remember her as a girl who wore pain like armor and still managed to laugh in the dark. You were there. That means something. If they forget her name, you must not. If they change her story, you must tell it back. If they say she was mad, you must remember her voice. Because voices, real ones, never burn. From someone who believes you. There is no signature. You fold the letter again, slower this time, pressing each crease as if sealing it into your skin. You think of the crowd, of how many stared and forgot, how many watched and turned away. But you didn't, and now you wonder if that is enough. Later that day, the same young woman returns. She brings no letter this time. Only a loaf of bread, fresh, warm, split down the middle. It smells like rosemary. She doesn't speak. She simply places it beside you and leaves. You eat it slowly, not with hunger, but reverence. And you think of Joan's last question. Will you remember me? That night, you whisper back. I already do. There is a difference between surviving and continuing. Surviving is the act of breath, pulse, instinct. Continuing is harder. Continuing means remembering, carrying weight, choosing to step forward, not because you must, but because something or someone once asked you to. You remain in that upper room for what must be months, though no one ever tells you how long. The guards no longer bark at you. The meals arrive at regular intervals now, thin broth, crusts of bread, sometimes a fig or an onion when the carts from the countryside run heavy. You are not a guest, but neither are you quite a prisoner anymore. A gray space, a liminal space. You suspect that is what frightens them most, that they don't know what to call you. You were a thief. You were a witness. You were a cellmate of the condemned girl who claimed to hear angels. And now, what are you? You begin to speak aloud again, though always when you are alone, sometimes to the air, sometimes to the stone, sometimes to Joan. You tell her about the spider that has returned to your window, spinning a new web from the same corner where the rain leaks in. You tell her about the boy you glimpsed in the courtyard yesterday, the one who once laughed during her burning, now sweeping ashes in silence, no longer smiling. You tell her about the guards, how the one with the crooked nose now limps after falling down a wet stair. You don't take joy in it, but you note it. as one would note the turning of seasons. The young woman who brought the letter returns, now more often. She never stays long, but she brings little things. An extra candle, a piece of soap, once, a scrap of linen with a clumsily embroidered lily stitched into the center. You recognize the attempt. It is not skilled work, but it is sincere. You fold the cloth and keep it near the ribbon, which remains tucked safely against your ribs. No one asks about it. Perhaps they've forgotten, or perhaps they dare not. And slowly, the world beyond the prison begins to stir again. You hear it first in the distant bells, joyous ones this time, celebrating a wedding or perhaps a saint's feast. Then in the footsteps that pass your door, not hurried, not hostile, just human. And then, one morning, the door opens. A guard enters, a different one, younger, stern-faced, but not cruel. "You're being released," he says. You stare. "Released," you echo. The word feels foreign on your tongue. He nods, offers no explanation. Perhaps he has none. He places a bundle on the floor, your old dress, washed and patched, along with a pair of worn shoes and a scarf. You wonder who tended to them, who looked at your belongings and thought, "This should be mended." You dress slowly, carefully. The fabric is stiff but clean. The shoes pinch, but you do not complain. The scarf you tie around your head, not out of modesty, but protection. There are things in the world you do not wish to be recognized for. When you step outside, the air surprises you. It is not the stale, metallic breath of the dungeon, nor the sour drafts that sometimes swept the halls of the upper rooms. It is real air, morning air, alive with birdsong, wind, the scent of something green. You inhale, and for a moment, the world tilts. You are not dizzy, but weightless, untethered. The city of Rouen spreads before you. Cobbled streets, roofs of slate, vendors calling to one another with the rhythm of routine. And beyond, in the distance, the river gray and lazy, dragging sunlight behind it like thread through water. You walk, not quickly, not slowly. You simply move, as if retracing steps you haven't yet taken. You pass the market square. The place where they burned her is bare now. No stake, no pyre, just stone, cleaned too thoroughly, as though the city fears its own reflection. But someone has left flowers. Not a bouquet, just a single bundle, wilted, but deliberate. You pause beside it. You do not touch it. You do not kneel. You only look. You wonder who else remembers. From there, you follow the streets out of the center toward the low hills where peasants gather herbs and the wind carries fewer lies. You find a cottage, or rather, a hut, empty, but standing, roof patched with moss, door crooked on its hinges, but dry. You spend 3 days cleaning it with a stick and wet rags, and on the 4th day, it begins to resemble shelter. You are alone, but not lonely. Not yet. The villagers are wary at first. They pass you with nods that barely form. They ask no questions. You suspect they've heard rumors of the woman who shared a cell with the Witch of Orléans, of the girl who emerged from the prison quiet, unbroken, of the peasant with nothing, and yet eyes full of stories. Still, one by one, they warm. They begin to knock on your door. A boy with a bleeding knee. A woman heavy with child and unsure of her months. An old man whose joints twist like rope in winter. They come with quiet mouths and hopeful eyes. You are not a healer, but you have watched. You have listened. You have survived. And sometimes, that is enough to make others believe you know things they do not. You never charge. They leave coins anyway, or eggs, or firewood. You begin to eat regularly. You begin to sleep again, and in your dreams, she returns. Not in fire this time, but in gardens. Joan walks barefoot between rows of lavender, hands stained with soil. She laughs when you ask where her armor is. She says she doesn't need it anymore. She says the voices have gone quiet. But not because they left, because they no longer need to shout. The world, she says, is learning to listen without them. You always wake with the taste of herbs on your tongue. And slowly, the seasons change. In spring, you plant onions in the back garden. In summer, you barter for a goat. In autumn, you trade stitched cloth for wool. In winter, you make candles. Every year, on the morning of May 30th, you rise before dawn, climb the low hill behind the village, and place a white ribbon in the branches of the old birch tree there. You say no words. You sing no hymns. You only press your fingers to the bark and wait until the sun rises. And every year, the villagers notice. And every year, someone else joins you. One year, a girl who wants to be a soldier. Another year, a widow who lost her daughter to fever and never stopped hearing her name in the wind. One year, no one joins you, but when you return home, someone has left a loaf of bread on your step. You sit and eat it. You never stop telling her story. You tell it in whispers, in herbs, in ribbons. In the gentle way you place a hand on a fevered brow and say, "You're braver than you know." You tell it in silence. You tell it by surviving. And once, just once, when the night is cold and the wind bites cruelly, you hear her voice again, just behind your left shoulder, where she used to sit in the cell. She says nothing. She only hums. And you hum with her. Because some songs, like some voices, are never truly lost. They only wait. The years pass without ceremony. No herald arrives to mark your name in any ledger. No bishop kneels to hear your confessions. No village child runs through your garden calling you mother or saint or even witch. But time still moves around you, steady as a river that no longer needs to flood to be heard. You live simply. The roof leaks sometimes, and your right knee no longer bends without complaint. Your goat, Beatrice named not for anyone in particular, but simply because the name felt gentle, grew old and stiff by your side. When she died, you lit a candle and whispered thanks. You don't know if animals have souls, but you know they have eyes that watch and ears that listen, and that has always seemed close enough. The villagers still visit, though not as often as they once did. They come when someone is dying, or when a child is born with a strange mark, or when a wife dreams the same dream 3 nights in a row. You've earned the name, the listener. You neither reject nor accept it. It fits, in a way. You have listened more than you have spoken in this life, and perhaps that is your greatest wisdom. You never speak Joan's name openly, not anymore, not because you've forgotten, or because it wounds you, but because some things, once named, risk being reduced. She was never only a martyr, Never just a witch or a saint or a soldier. She was Joan, and to you, that means too much for the world to carve into a statue or a line in scripture. Still, the world does try. You begin to hear stories from travelers and merchants. One man, drunk on cider and pride, tells a crowd in the village square that the Pope is reconsidering her case, that perhaps she wasn't a heretic after all, that perhaps the voices she heard were divine, that the Church, in its mercy, is reviewing her trial. You don't interrupt. You don't scoff. You only tilt your head and think, "Now," the man continues, proudly describing how learned men and clerics are combing through transcripts, interviewing witnesses, weighing evidence. He says they'll decide if she was truly guilty or if she died unjustly. You stand and walk away before he finishes. You know the truth already. It was never a question of guilt. It was a question of fear. Fear of a girl who did not obey. Fear of a girl who commanded with faith instead of bloodlines. Fear of a girl who spoke plainly and without apology. That cannot be tried fairly in any court. You begin to write things down, not in letters, not for bishops or kings, just scraps, bits of parchment, bark, cloth. You write what you remember, not what she said, always, but how she said it. The rhythms, the pauses, the moments between. You don't expect anyone to find them, but it feels necessary, like placing stones along a path, even if no one follows. And one day, a young man comes to your door. He looks like a monk, though he wears no collar. Too clean to be a laborer, too thin to be dangerous. He bows his head low and asks, "Are you the one who shared her cell?" You don't answer immediately. You pour him water, give him a stool. He waits. He's patient, but not passive. His eyes flick constantly, noticing everything: the cracks in the wall, the ribbon tucked into your sleeve, the way you wince when you sit. Finally, you nod. He exhales. They're writing it all down now. He says, the trial, the retrial, the testimonies. They want to set the record straight. You nod again, slower this time. He opens a small leather-bound book, takes a charcoal stick from his satchel. "May I ask you questions?" You raise an eyebrow. "I won't twist your words," he promises. You believe him, but you still say no. Instead, you tell him to put away his stick and listen. And then you begin. You speak not to glorify, not to defend, but to remember. You speak of how she sat in the dark, humming songs too old for priests. Of how she asked if the voices would still come when the fire began. Of how she gave you her ribbon and thanked you, not for believing, but for staying. You do not speak in grand language. You do not craft epics or sermons. You simply tell him how a girl, chained and barefoot, spoke of lavender, of banners, of heavy swords and gentle saints. And when you finish, you say nothing more. He doesn't write anything down, but you can see that he's memorized every word. Before he leaves, he asks, if they make her a saint, would that be enough? You think for a long while. Then you say, it would be something, but it would never be her. He bows again, and this time you bow back. He does not return. But years later, another visitor arrives, a girl, no older than 15, wearing boots too large and hair cropped unevenly beneath a soldier's cap. She carries a satchel full of apples and a parchment wrapped in cloth. She offers them to you. They say she's been declared innocent. The girl says that the church got it wrong. You nod. They say she's to be canonized, she adds. Again, you nod. The girl hesitates, then asks, Is it true what she did? You smile not kindly, but honestly. She did more than they say. You reply, unless she did what no one else would. The girl grins. I want to be like her. You shake your head. Don't be like you. That's what she did. She blinks, uncertain, but she takes your hand. And in that moment, something stirs. A memory, perhaps, or a promise. And you realize it has happened. Not in books, not in cathedrals, but here, in the dirt, in the breath between words, in the hand of a stranger. You live for many more years, enough to see winter soften, enough to see wheat rise taller than your window, enough to watch the road fill with girls in trousers and boys in robes. And every year, on May 30th, the hill fills with ribbons. White ones, frayed ones, new ones. They hang like silent prayers from every branch. And sometimes, just sometimes, you hum. It begins with a cough. Nothing sharp, nothing dramatic. Just a dry rasp in your chest one morning as you rise. A whisper of dust stirring in lungs that have inhaled too much smoke, too much damp, too much memory. You ignore it, at first. You've lived through worse. You've swallowed winter air like knives, tasted rot in your bread, stitched wounds with ash when thread ran short. A cough is not death, it is simply another visitor. But it stays. It deepens. It threads itself into your ribs, wakes you in the night, folds your breath in half. When you bend to tend the fire, your back does not return upright without protest. Your hands, once steady enough to weave ribbon into stitches, now tremble when you lift your cup. Your joints throb before the frost comes, and your knees ache even on warm afternoons. And still, you continue, because that is what you do, what you've always done. You've continued. The villagers notice. They speak your name with softer tones now. The children, those who once crept up the path to spy on the old woman who spoke to wind and fire, now come in daylight with baskets of apples and jars of broth. A girl brings you tea. A boy chops wood. The visits become more frequent. Someone repairs your shutters without being asked. Someone else rethatches your roof in silence. They do not speak of dying. You appreciate that. One morning, while stirring a pot of leeks over the hearth, you feel your knees give. The floor rises to meet you not cruelly, but with inevitability. You do not cry out. You do not fear. You simply rest there, cheek pressed to the cool stones, waiting for the strength to return. It doesn't. And when the girl with the tea arrives that evening and finds you on the floor, she does not panic. She kneels. She speaks your name. She lifts your head gently into her lap. You recognize her. One of the ribbon bearers. You think her name might be Alex. Stay, you whisper. Not because you are afraid, but because the quiet feels too large tonight. She does. She sings softly a hymn you do not know, but one that folds around your ears like linen. Her voice quivers at first, but steadies. It is not perfect. It is not trained, but it is brave. You sleep, and when you wake, you are no longer in your cottage. At first, you believe yourself dead. The walls are too clean, the linens too white, but the smell of soap and herbs lingers, And when you try to sit up, pain answers back. You are alive. You are in the home of the priest. You remember now he is not one of the cruel ones. Young. Too young for his robes. Really. You once saw him crying after a miscarriage took a baker's child. He visits you that evening with a bowl of milk and honey. He calls you mother, though you never bore a child in this life. He does not preach, he does not ask, he only sits. I saw her once, he says quietly. Before the trial, my father took me to Paris. I was just a boy. You turn your head. She passed by on horseback. He continues, in armor, a white banner above her. I asked my father if she was a queen. He said no. He said she was something harder. You smile. The priest sighs. We failed her. You say nothing, because silence is often the truest agreement. He touches your wrist. His hand is warm. You should speak to them, the ones who are writing it all down, the scholars, the chroniclers. They're still searching, still trying to make sense of it all. You shake your head. They won't understand. He furrows his brow. Then help them. You look at him, this man in soft robes and soft eyes, and you want to tell him the truth. That understanding was never the point. That remembering is not the same as explaining. That Joan's life cannot be mapped in dates and doctrine. That she was a girl who smelled of straw and rain, who hummed to herself in the dark, who feared silence more than fire, and whose last words were not curses, but thanks. Instead, you say only, tell them to look for the ribbon. The priest doesn't understand, but he nods. You stay in his home through the winter. They bring you books, food, wool, a stool near the fire, and questions. From all corners of France they come. A scribe from Reims, who read fragments of your name in a bishop's letter. A nun from Tours, whose mother once whispered that her own grandmother had heard a story about a cellmate. A young historian from Orléans, wide-eyed and reverent, who holds your hand too tightly when he asks, was she really so calm at the end? You answer them, when you can, not with facts, with fragments. She liked lavender. She hated fish. She once asked if the saints slept. She said her sword felt heavier than her fear. And every answer leads to more. You do not resist, but you do not give them everything. Some stories are not yours to give. One day, Alex returns the girl with the tea. She's taller now, straighter. Her voice no longer trembles. She carries with her a stack of papers, bound in cloth. They wrote it, she says, all of it. Her story, the trial, the retrial. Your name is there, too. You take the bundle. You do not open it. You place it on the table beside the fire and ask, what name did they give her? Alex smiles. Saint. You nod. But inside, you feel the ache. Because saints are statues. Saints are candles and Latin and gilded glass. Saints do not sweat. Saints do not bleed. Saints do not laugh at your dreams or whisper to spiders or ask if you believe in bread more than miracles. Joan was never a saint to you. She was a girl. And that, perhaps, is the holiest thing of all. You ask Alex to walk with you, one last time. She hesitates, but agrees. You do not go far. Just to the hill. Your knees hurt, your breath stumbles, but you make it. The birch still stands. Ribbons still hang. Dozens now, hundreds. White, frayed, braided, dyed. They clatter like prayer wheels in the wind. Alex stands beside you, quiet. You pull a ribbon from your pocket. The same one. Faded now, nearly gray. You tie it to the lowest branch. Did you ever stop missing her? Alex asks. You think for a long time. Then you say, no, but I stopped needing to. Alex doesn't speak again. She just takes your hand. And together, you watch the wind dance. You live one more spring. Just enough to see the first lavender bloom outside the priest's window. Just enough to hear children whisper Joan's name not with fear, but with awe. Just enough to know you are not the only one who listened. And when the end comes, it is quiet. No fire. No iron. No stake. Only linen sheets. A bird singing near the sill. And the scent of ribbon and rain. In the stillness that follows death. Something curious happens. You become aware, not sharply, not suddenly, but with a gentle, unfolding certainty. You float, unburdened by the bones that once carried you, untroubled by lungs that rasped with age. You are no longer tethered by pain or hunger, or the weight of years remembered and forgotten. Yet, strangely, you feel more yourself now than ever before, as if shedding your body has only sharpened your awareness of who you truly were and what you meant. You are not afraid. You wait, floating in the cool darkness, expecting some bright tunnel or angelic voice, as the priests always described, but nothing comes. Instead, you drift in gentle silence. Perhaps you think, the next world is nothing more complicated than a restful darkness, one long, soothing exhale. But then a whisper. It is soft at first, like wind through autumn leaves. It moves across whatever you have become, not flesh anymore, but memory, spirit, thought. You strain to hear clearly. Is it your own voice, returning from the depths of your mind, or is it something else? Something older and kinder. Then you recognize it. It is Joan. Her voice has not aged. She sounds exactly as she did on that night in the cell, clear, calm, carrying an impossible certainty. She does not speak in words at first, only hums that same ancient hymn, so faint and yet so close. Your memory awakens fully, and you feel as though you might weep if you still had eyes to cry with. You call out to her not aloud, but with your spirit, your longing, your questions. She responds warmly, her voice clearer now. You came. I wasn't sure you would. You smile inwardly. I wasn't sure either. She laughs softly, the sound vibrating gently through the space between you. There is no sight here, but you know she is near, as if you both float together in a river of shared memory. It feels natural, as though this meeting was always waiting, patient as the stone walls you once shared. Do you remember, she asks gently. You nod, or whatever passes for nodding here, and reply, everything. She pauses a moment, then whispers again, softer now. Even the flames. You hesitate, because honesty matters here, perhaps more than anywhere else. Yes, especially the flames. She sighs. A sigh filled not with pain, but something softer understanding. Perhaps. I wasn't afraid. You know. It hurt. Yes. But pain was never the worst thing. Forgetting would have been worse. You feel the truth in her words. You have carried them quietly through decades, unsure if she truly meant them or if it was simply bravery at the end. Now you know. Did you see me afterward, you ask? She answers slowly, thoughtfully. I saw everything. I saw you hold the ribbon. I saw you walk to the hill every year. I saw you tell my story, not the version they wrote, but the truth that lived in the quiet between your words. You made it real. You made me real. You feel relief wash through you. You hadn't known you'd carried so much doubt. They called you a saint. You whisper, I wasn't sure how you would feel about that. She laughs again richly. This time, a gentle warmth that envelops you both. I suppose it's better than witch or madwoman. But saints are lonely things. People pray to saints, but they never sit with them, never talk, never laugh. I liked laughter best. You find yourself laughing with her, softly, joyfully, the sound blending with hers until you can no longer tell them apart. You feel weightless, buoyed by shared memories, as if all your hidden sorrows have finally dissolved. And for a moment, you are back in the cell with her again, not cold or frightened, but comforted by the strange, clear light she always carried within her. Do you still hear the voices you ask quietly? She grows thoughtful. Yes, but not as before. It's different here, softer, like a conversation with the wind. I think they always spoke that way. I was just too young to know it. Too young, too eager. I thought I had to shout, to convince the world. Now I know the voices never wanted shouting, only listening. You ponder that. You spent your life listening, but never fully understood how profound that act truly was until now. She continues gently, as though sensing your thoughts. They remember you too. You know the voices. They whispered your name sometimes. Not loudly, not often, but gently. The way one whispers about someone beloved but quiet. Someone who listened. You feel a rush of gratitude, not pride, but something softer, deeper. Recognition. Belonging. Did they ever tell you why you ask carefully? Why they chose you? She answers honestly, without hesitation. I asked many times. They never gave a clear answer. Perhaps it was never important why. Perhaps the asking was enough. You reflect on your own life. So many unanswered questions, yet now they no longer trouble you. They feel distant, unnecessary. The need for explanations fades into gentle silence, and you find yourself content with simply being, simply remembering. What happens now, you whisper? Now, she says gently, we rest. And someday, perhaps, we return, not as saints, not as heroes, but as ordinary people who remember how to listen. Because listening is the miracle. You know, the voices never asked for followers or armies. They asked for listeners. You realize then, with a clarity unlike anything you felt in life, that Joan's true miracle was not her banner, her armor, or her bravery in battle. Her miracle was simple, invisible. She listened to voices others ignored. She spoke truths others feared. She made room for quiet certainty in a world that demanded noise. And you, by some gentle, unspoken grace, became part of that miracle too. The darkness around you softens further, like ink spreading across parchment, slowly fading into a gentle, comforting gray. Her voice grows distant but never quite leaves. You feel a sense of peace settling into you, deep and lasting. Will we speak again, you ask softly? She answers gently, warmly. We always will, in the quiet between words. You will know how to find me. You nod. You trust that she's right. The threads of your lives remain intertwined, bound not by chains or ribbons, but by shared silence, by memory, by listening. As the last echoes of her voice fade gently into the stillness, you realize there is no longer any need to hold on. You release the fragments of your story, your sorrows, your joys. You let yourself drift, knowing that wherever you go, whatever comes next, you have already carried the most precious truth with you. You lived, you listened, you remembered, and that, perhaps, is more than enough. The darkness deepens softly, gently. The quiet grows complete. Yet, within it, you still sense Joan's presence not as a saint, not as a martyr, but as a friend who whispered courage in the dark, who taught you that bravery was not the absence of fear, but the willingness to continue through it. You rest, and within that rest, something beautiful remains. It is not quite silence. It is not quite song. It is simply the echo of two voices, joined together in quiet laughter, resonating gently through eternity. Time, when it returns, does not do so with trumpets. It arrives slowly, quietly, like the lifting of morning fog over a familiar field, revealing the landscape not as it was but as it has become. And in that return, you are no longer the girl thrown into a prison cell. You are no longer the quiet listener of whispers, nor the trembling woman standing beneath a burning sky. You are something else now, something gentler, something wider than any name could contain. It has been many years since your last breath, yet your story, hers and yours, is still unfolding. It begins again with a child. She is no older than 10, thin, but strong-legged from running between the orchard and the river. Her hands are quick, her tongue quicker, and her curiosity boundless. She is not afraid of thorns, of bees, of mud. She has never yet heard the word obedient spoken as a compliment. Her mother scolds her often too loud, too bold, too strange, but her grandmother only smiles and says, "The fire that warms can also light the world." The child's name is Clémence. She hears of Joan long before she reads of her. She hears the stories in kitchens, by candlelight, in the whispers of market stalls. But it is not the sermons or the relics that capture her. It is the tale of the girl in chains who feared forgetting more than burning. The one who spoke to saints and to spiders. The one who handed a ribbon to a stranger and said, "Remember me." Clémence asks her grandmother who that stranger was. Her grandmother never hesitates. She was a listener. Clémence doesn't fully understand, but the word settles in her chest like a seed waiting for the rain. Years pass. Clémence grows taller, sharper. The world presses in around her, tries to make her smaller. Teachers tell her to speak less. Priests tell her to doubt her instincts. Boys tell her to soften her eyes when she walks past. She tries, for a time. Then one day, she finds a bundle of old cloth in her grandmother's chest. Inside it, a parchment, a ribbon, and a story written in faded ink. She reads it once, then again. Then she copies it, word for word, onto new paper. With ink, she mixes herself, walnut, vinegar, salt. She gives the original back to her grandmother, but the words now live in her hands. By the time she is 16, Clémence is writing stories of her own, not just Joan's, but others of the women who nursed plague victims and were buried without names, of girls who fled marriages and took to sea, of men who loved men and prayed they might not burn for it. She travels, walks from town to town, sleeps in haylofts, reads in churches, waits tables when she must, listens always. In every village, she finds someone who remembers the name Joan. In every village, she hears a different version. Some call her a madwoman. Some call her a saint. Some say she turned into a dove at the pyre. Some say her ashes brought rain. Some say she was born from a bolt of lightning and vanished into smoke. Clémence listens to them all. But at night, by her own fire, she writes the version passed down from the listener. The version where Joan was simply a girl with too much courage and no armor thick enough to hold it. The version where she laughed in prison, braided ribbons into her hair, and feared silence more than flames. The version where she gave her final words not to a bishop or a judge, but to a stranger who had nothing to offer but presence. By the time Clémence is 20, her words have begun to travel without her. She hears them repeated in taverns, recited in classrooms, sung softly by girls walking home from the well. Once, in a small chapel, she sees a child tuck a white ribbon beneath a statue's foot, not as offering, but as conversation. Clémence does not cry. She smiles. She walks to the front of the chapel and leaves her own ribbon. She ties it to a worn nail in the doorframe. Not for the saint, for the listener, the woman who stayed, the one who didn't look away. History forgets you again and again. It is what history does best. It chisels the names of kings into stone and lets the names of servants melt like wax. It turns queens into mothers, mothers into shadows, shadows into silence. But sometimes, rarely, someone refuses to let go. Sometimes a memory is held like an ember through the wind, carried hand to hand, until it sparks again. Sometimes, a single ribbon survives the fire. And sometimes, a woman who was never supposed to matter ends up changing everything. Not by fighting, not by ruling, but by listening. That is how the church canonizes you, not with gold or incense, but by necessity. Your story becomes too persistent, too full of grace, too human to ignore. They canonized Joan, not because she was convenient, but because they could not silence the people who remembered her, who lit candles not in cathedrals, but in kitchens, who recited her words not in Latin, but in laughter. And in every one of those remembered stories, you are there. The one who shared her final night, the one who was not afraid to meet her gaze, the one who carried the truth, not the version scrubbed for scripture, but the version that lived beneath her fingernails and inside the ribbon she gave you. Your grave is unmarked. The field where your bones rest has no stone, no fence, no carved inscription. But the earth there is soft, and each spring it grows white blossoms with petals the shape of teardrops. Pilgrims sometimes pass that way, not knowing what draws them. Some leave coins, some leave bread, but more often they leave ribbons, tied to saplings, tied to fence posts, tied to one another. They do not know your name. They do not need to. They know the story, the fire, the voice, the girl, and the woman who listened. The church calls her Saint Joan of Arc now. The world calls her a martyr, a legend, a miracle. But you who knew her best knew she was something else. A frightened, fearless girl. A song, a silence that never quite faded. And in every quiet moment when someone dares to listen, truly listen, she returns. And so do you. You are no longer flesh, no longer breath, no longer name, but you remain. In the deep threads of memory that wind through forests and stone, in the murmur of pilgrims' steps, in the scratch of ribbon against bark, in the slow exhale of someone sitting quietly by a grave, they cannot explain you are there, not haunting, not watching, not even speaking, simply existing, as presence, as echo, as story. And still, you listen. You do not know how many years have passed, not in the way you once counted seasons by harvests or first frosts, by aching joints and the strength of the sun. Now, time feels different. It doesn't move forward so much as fold and unfold like cloth in a basket. You drift through it like smoke through a tapestry, catching on names, on faces, on whispered prayers spoken in candlelight. Most of them don't know your name. That has long since vanished into earth and silence. But they remember your shape, not your body, but your presence. The invisible weight of a witness. A girl named Leonie, tending sheep outside of Domremy, kneels beside a spring and hears something in the gurgle of the water. It is not a voice exactly, but it carries rhythm and memory. That evening, she ties a ribbon to a willow and whispers thanks to a woman she's never met. In a convent in Reims, a nun named Bernadette studies the margins of an old text, its ink faded, its pages thumb-worn. She finds a sentence scrawled in the edge. I was with her when she slept for the last time. She feared silence more than flames. Bernadette copies it onto her sleeve with charcoal and walks through the halls repeating it under her breath, not as a prayer, but as a promise. Elsewhere, in a town far to the south, a soldier returns from war with a ribbon sewn into the inside of his breastplate. He will not say where it came from, only that it was given to him by a girl who could not speak, but hummed like she was not alone. You move among them, not like a ghost, but like a wind that has nowhere else to go. And you are not alone. Joan is there too, not always beside you, sometimes far away, her presence hidden inside the shout of a child standing up to her father, or the breath held by a boy on the edge of a decision that could cost him everything. She flickers in the space between courage and fear. She does not appear with trumpet or flame, not anymore. She comes quietly, like you, when needed, when summoned not by ritual, but by choice. You cross paths sometimes, not with words, with memory. She once told you she feared that the voices might leave her in the fire, but they didn't. You know now that they became part of her, not separate, just as you have become part of this world not in form, but in presence. It's strange. You think, how many stories are written about endings, about death, as if that were the last page, as if memory did not ripple beyond the final breath, as if the quiet things did not last longer than the shouted ones. One evening, in a dimly lit room beneath a church in Tours, a young man sits alone. He is a monk, but barely his robes still stiff from the dye, his hands more used to ink than to scripture. He has read the accounts. He has memorized the names of judges, the articles of condemnation, the official record of Joan's trial. He knows that her ashes were cast into the Seine, that her armor was taken, that her banner was lost. And yet, something feels missing. He writes in his journal they told her story through the mouths of men, but someone else was there, someone who watched, who listened. He does not know your name, but he is looking for you. He begins to travel. Not for fame, not for recognition, for understanding. He walks to Rouen and stands in the square where the pyre once stood. There is a plaque now, flat and polished, carved with carefully chosen words. It speaks of martyrdom and injustice. It does not speak of fear, of silence, of the girl beside her in the cell. So he walks beyond the city walls. He searches for the hill, for the tree, for the ribbons, and he finds it. Not immediately, but eventually, guided not by map or legend, but by instinct. The hill is not grand, not high, just a gentle rise where the wind moves like breath and the grass lies flattened in strange patterns, as though people have knelt there often in prayer or in grief. The birch tree stands as it always has, though older now, its bark peeling in soft curls, its roots gripping the earth like memory. Ribbons hang in silence. Some are white, frayed from years of wind and rain. Some are newer blue, red, even gold. Some bear names, written in ink that has bled away. Others carry no words at all, just knots, just presence. The young man kneels. He does not pray. He listens, and you are there, not as apparition, not as voice, as presence, as knowing. He stays until the sun begins to fall. Then he rises, leaves no offering, says no goodbye. But when he returns to the monastery, he writes a single sentence in the margins of his journal. She was remembered not by the church, but by the ones who stayed. In the years that follow, he writes quietly, spreading your story in glances and footnotes, refusing to let your memory vanish entirely into the fire of Joan's fame. He becomes a quiet guardian of your echo. He does not claim your identity. He does not give you a false name. He simply calls you the witness. And slowly, across time, others begin to do the same. Stories begin to emerge, not official ones, but whispered ones of the woman who shared Joan's final night, of the ribbon passed from hand to hand, of the nameless soul who did not kneel before judges, who did not write letters to kings, but who watched, listened, remembered. A girl in Avignon dreams of a prison cell and wakes crying, though she has never seen Rouen. A grandmother in Brittany tells her granddaughter, "When you are afraid, tie something to the wind and let it carry your fear away." A man digging a well in Poitiers finds a coin marked with a lily and says nothing, only puts it in his pocket and hums a tune he does not know. You remain, not as legend, not as miracle, as reminder that listening is a kind of love, that witnessing is a kind of defiance, that memory, real memory, not the kind carved into stone, but the kind folded into hearts, is sacred. And somewhere, far from any church or court, in a cottage rebuilt from the bones of an old one, a woman with graying hair teaches her daughter how to twist fabric into a ribbon. She doesn't say why. She only says, "It matters." And the girl believes her, because stories that survive fire carry something no judgment can erase. Because a girl once handed a ribbon to a stranger in the dark, and that stranger listened. It is a winter evening in Chinon, years, decades, perhaps centuries since the first flame climbed the stake in Rouen. Snow falls silently across the riverbanks, dusting the sloped rooftops, collecting in the folds of wooden carts and empty baskets abandoned until morning. The cobbled streets glisten, half frozen, and the shutters of the houses creak as the wind pushes past them. But inside one particular house, small, stone, unassuming, the hearth glows, and a woman sits by the fire, her back bent, her fingers slow but practiced. She is not young. She was not born when Joan walked the earth, but she knows her story. More importantly, she knows yours. She speaks it aloud to a child sitting beside her, her grandson, perhaps, or a neighbor's orphan taken in when the harvest failed. He's too small for questions, too tired for attention, but she tells it anyway. Her voice is soft, cracked by cold and age, but steady in its rhythm. Her tale does not begin with visions or saints, nor does it end in fire. It begins in a prison, in the dark, beside a stranger. It begins with hunger, with silence, with breath. She tells the boy how Joan shared a cell with a woman who had nothing, no name, no family, no sword, but who listened when no one else dared. How that woman remembered Joan not as a warrior or a saint, but as a frightened girl who hummed to keep from disappearing. She tells him about the ribbon, passed from hand to hand, never burned, never lost. She tells him about the hill and the tree and the people who go there not to worship but to remember. The boy drifts to sleep with his head against her knee, and the woman, smiling faintly, ties a piece of thread around his wrist before she carries him to bed. Just a thread, white, plain, but he will never remove it. Elsewhere, under the dim lanterns of a library in Lyon, a scholar leafs through pages written long ago in a hand he doesn't recognize. The script is uneven, hesitant, as if the writer feared that too much truth on the page might call trouble. Yet he reads with fascination. The words don't align with the official histories. They contradict, confuse, but they feel true. There's something raw in the margins, something human. A passage reads, "She asked me if I believed in saints. I said I believed in bread. She laughed, and I think she meant it." The scholar pauses. He knows that line won't be accepted by the committee assembling the revised hagiography. They want facts, church-sanctioned visions, military records, names of noblemen. But this moment in the dark between two women with no witness but one another feels more real than any coronation. He copies the quote, tucks it into his satchel. Later, he reads it aloud to his daughter. She is 12 and already bored of school, already questioning why the lives of great men matter more than the questions of quiet women. He does not have an answer. So he gives her that quote, and she copies it into the back of her prayer book in ink that will one day blur with age and tear stains. Time continues, indifferent and slow, and yet your story keeps weaving itself through its folds. In the quiet before dawn, in a farmhouse near Tours, a midwife named Helene ties a ribbon around the wrist of a stillborn child, says a prayer not to saints, but to the woman who watched. She does not know your face, but in the trembling hush of that moment, she whispers that you understand. In a convent, a nun who no longer believes in miracles lights a candle before a bare wall and says nothing. The flame flickers. It is enough. In the attic of a scholar's house, a boy finds a shoebox of ribbons, white, frayed, some blood-stained. He asks his grandfather what they mean. The old man says, "They belonged to those who remembered." The boy ties one to his satchel the next day. No one at school asks why. He hopes they never will. You are remembered not through statues or mass, but through repetition, through hands braiding ribbons, through lullabies sung in unfamiliar languages that still carry your rhythm, through girls who carry their silence like a sword, through boys who choose kindness when they could choose power, through elders who pass stories without correcting them, because sometimes the errors are what keep the stories human. You become a myth, yes, but not a distant one. Yours is the kind of myth carried in pockets, pressed in books, sewn into hymns. When pilgrims gather at the birch on the hill, there are no ceremonies, no relics, no sermons, just quiet. They tie their ribbons, sit beneath the branches, and speak names only they remember. Some are names of the dead, some are unborn, some are names they dare not speak elsewhere. The tree never asks, the wind never judges, and you, wherever you are now, gather those names and hold them like pages in the book no one thought to write. Once, a bishop visits the hill. He comes not in vestments, but in a wool cloak, walking alone with his hands behind his back. He does not kneel. He does not pray. He walks slowly, reading the ribbons, nodding once in a while. He ties nothing himself, but before he leaves, he takes a folded paper from his coat and presses it into the bark of the tree. He walks away without turning back. Later, a girl finds the paper. It is blank, except for a single sentence. Forgive us for not asking your name. She ties it to the highest branch she can reach. Years pass. Names change. Maps are redrawn. Wars begin and end. But your story does not fade. It adapts. It shifts. It finds new homes. In a modern city, where glass buildings reach the sky and trains hum beneath the streets, a professor of comparative literature lectures on the importance of unnamed voices in medieval narratives. She says, "We always focus on the saints, but sometimes the story survives because someone in the shadows told it back to the world." She shares an excerpt from an anonymous text found in a ruined chapel outside Orléans. The students don't take notes. They just listen. After class, one leaves a white ribbon tied to the statue outside the university gate. In a hospital, a woman lies awake while machines whisper around her. Her daughter sits beside her, unsure what to say. She remembers a story she read years ago about two women in a cell, one who died, one who remembered. She tells it aloud, not knowing the ending, but hoping it is enough. It is. Somewhere in a city library, a child stumbles upon a children's book with hand-drawn illustrations. It tells the story of Joan of Arc, but through the eyes of a girl who shared her final night. The child doesn't know what a heretic is, or a saint, or a martyr, but she understands what it means to sit with someone when they're afraid. She closes the book and says, "I want to be like her." Her father asks, "Like Joan?" The girl shakes her head. "No, the other one. The one who stayed. The one who didn't look away. The one who listened." You smile wherever you are. Not because they remember your name, but because they remember your heart. Because you once sat in silence with a girl the world could not hold. Because you made that silence sacred. And because now, in every quiet act of compassion, you return not as ghost, not as legend, but as invitation. To be present, to bear witness, to listen. You never asked to be remembered. That was never your purpose, never your desire. You were not seeking a legacy the night you were thrown into that cell, You did not listen to Joan with the intention of carrying her voice through time. You had no parchment, no audience, no ambition. What you had was hunger, cold, weariness, and the courage, however unremarkable it seemed at the time, to sit beside another human being and hear her, truly hear her, as the rest of the world turned its back. And yet, here you are, scattered across centuries, not as a name in ink, but as a ripple in the water. Everywhere, your presence is felt, not seen, not praised, but felt. And perhaps that is the truest kind of legacy to be carried not by monuments, but by memory, not engraved, but inherited. It is summer now, somewhere along the Loire. A girl named Solène has spent the morning searching for feathers in the meadow behind her school. Her teacher said they were to gather things from nature to write poems about, and while other students brought stones or acorns, Solène insisted on feathers, white ones. Her classmates teased her. "What will you write about pigeons?" they laughed. But Solène didn't mind. She knows what she's writing. That evening, after dinner, she sits by the window with her notebook. The sun slants low, warm and heavy, and the lace curtain breathes softly in the breeze. Her pencil moves slowly across the paper. She writes, "Once, a girl with a sword burned. A woman who had no sword listened. The girl became fire. The woman became wind. And now, the trees remember them both." Her mother, reading over her shoulder, says nothing at first. Then quietly, she asks, "Where did you hear that?" Solène shrugs. I think I just knew." The mother smiles, though her eyes blur. Sometimes, the things we know don't come from books. That night, Solène ties a piece of string to the leg of her bedpost and whispers, "This is my ribbon." She does not know exactly who it is for, but she whispers anyway. In another town. Another night. A man named Auguste sits alone in a darkened library. His hands are stained with ink, and his spectacles slip down the bridge of his nose. He has spent the last 6 years translating obscure medieval manuscripts, searching for scraps of women's voices buried in male-dominated texts. He has read the trial of Joan of Arc a dozen times, each line burned into his memory. But tonight, something catches his attention, a line he had overlooked before, scrawled in the margin of a copy dated 1452 in ink, so faded it is nearly invisible. She held my hand when they came for her. He freezes. No one had ever mentioned a witness. No one had ever included this in the official account. The judges had written their verdict. The bishops had written their statements. But someone forgotten, someone real wrote this. Just one line. No name. No context. But a truth so plain, it could not have been imagined. He copies the line into his journal, carefully, reverently. Later, he includes it in a lecture. He calls it the unnamed companion. He says, "History often records who gave orders, who lit the fires, who wrote the laws, but occasionally, miraculously, it also records who held the hand. That is what I want us to remember." In the back row of the lecture hall, a young woman named Yvette closes her eyes and lets the words settle into her skin. She does not raise her hand. She does not speak. But she leaves the lecture with her palms open, fingers twitching slightly, as if trying to recall what it feels like to grasp something that matters. She becomes a teacher, not of history, of listening. In her classroom, She keeps a small wooden box on the shelf. Inside it, ribbons of different colors, all donated by her students over the years. She never tells them what they're for, but when a student cries, or struggles, or finally shares something they've never spoken aloud, she reaches for the box, offers a ribbon, and says, "Tie it somewhere safe." That moment matters. Eventually, the students stop asking what the ribbons mean. They simply know. And so, through small gestures, your story continues. You never speak again, not in the voice you once had, but your silence now carries the weight of thunder. You do not appear in stained glass, but you appear in reflection every time someone pauses before judgment, chooses kindness over certainty, or stays in a moment of someone else's pain without offering escape. You do not become saint or statue, but you become something sturdier, something quieter. You become the moment before the fire, the breath before the scream, the space where fear and love sit side by side and do not try to fix one another. You are felt in poetry, in lullabies, in rituals that have no name. You are remembered by girls who light candles in secret, by boys who tie ribbons to the wrists of their friends when they're too afraid to say "I'm hurting," by mothers who teach their children to sit in silence when someone is crying, rather than rush to fill it with words, by grandmothers who pass down stories that end not with triumph or tragedy, but with, "And still, she listened." In a village near the Pyrenees, there is a stone carved with no letters. It stands by itself in a field of wildflowers. No one knows who placed it there. Some say it marks the grave of a shepherdess. Others claim it was once a boundary stone. But every spring, someone leaves a white ribbon tied to a nearby tree. Not because they know the story, but because somehow they remember. Memory, you realize now, is not dependent on fact. It does not require accuracy, or evidence, or proof. It lives in the way someone breathes a little deeper after hearing a story that resonates. It lives in repetition, in shared glances, in tears that fall during a silence someone else dares to hold. It lives in the soil where you once stood, in the breath you gave when no one asked, in the hands you held without permission. You are not the fire. You are not the banner. You are not the sword. You are the silence that did not flinch. And because of that, Joan lives not in the pages of textbooks or the hymns of saints, but in the bodies and breaths of those who carry courage with trembling hands. Because of you, she was not alone. And because of you, no one truly is, even in places where the story was never written, where no ink has traced the shape of your presence, where no archive bears the mark of your voice. There is still something, some lingering pull, some thread that winds its way through time, binding hearts that have never met to a memory they never lived. That is what you have become, a quiet tether between strangers, a presence behind the words, a weight behind the silence. In the hills of Lorraine, where the soil is soft and the winds know the names of the lost, an old woman named Mireille tends a candle in her window. Every evening, as dusk slips over the rooftops and the hearth crackles low, she lights that single flame not for saints, not for the souls in purgatory, not even for the children she buried decades ago, but for the woman who listened. She does not know your name, she's never seen your face, but in her bones, she feels the echo of you. Her granddaughter, Clary, once asked, "Why the candle?" always at twilight, and Mireille, smoothing the girl's hair back behind one ear, had replied because someone, long ago, sat in the dark with another, and that candle never went out. It was not a story she read, not something taught in church. It came to her in fragments overheard in kitchens, half sung in lullabies, tucked into a letter passed down with no return address. But in every version, the listener remained. Clary grows up hearing this story again and again. Not the way others tell Joan's tale with saints and swords and thrones, but with cell walls, whispered prayers, and the warmth of a voice that asked for nothing but presence. When she is older, Clary becomes a healer. She studies herbs, learns the old chants, listens to the dying without trying to ease their passing too soon. Her patients often ask who taught her to sit so still, so unafraid, in the face of pain. She tells them, a woman I never met. In another part of France, in a house surrounded by roses, a painter named Gaspard finds himself staring at a blank canvas for weeks. He has painted kings, gods, even the Virgin Mary. But now something in him resists. He dreams nightly of a prison cell, dim and damp, where two women sit across from one another, one young, brilliant-eyed, luminous even in chains, the other older, worn, soft, silent. When he wakes, the dream fades, but the feeling remains. One morning, with rain pressing against his windows like memory, he begins to paint not a scene of triumph, nor a martyrdom, but the moment before, the hush before dawn, two figures, seated, one in shackles, her hands folded as if in prayer, the other seated across from her, only half visible. She has no halo, no armor, no name, only her posture, only her listening. When he finishes, he titles the painting Not Alone. He does not explain the title to the gallery, but the visitors somehow understand. The image becomes quietly popular, not widely shared, not printed on coins or hung in museums, but passed between those who feel things deeply and cannot always explain why. One visitor, a woman named Sabine, stares at the painting for nearly an hour. Her hands never leave her sides. Her lips do not part. But when she leaves, she walks to the river and ties a ribbon to the railing of the old footbridge. She does not speak aloud. She only whispers into the wind. Thank you for staying. This becomes a pattern. In city after city, people begin tying ribbons to places where no stories have been recorded, at hospital windows, at refugee camps, at train stations where goodbyes last too long. Not for saints, not for miracles, but for those who bore witness, for those who stayed. Because that is what you are. You were the one who did not turn away. In the church's grand accounts, Joan's voices came from heaven. Michael, Margaret, Catherine. Their names are carved into stone, repeated in homilies, painted in glorious frescoes across the ceilings of cathedrals. But in the hearts of the ordinary, your name is whispered more quietly. You are the nameless woman who kept her eyes open while others closed theirs. You are the memory that pressed gently into someone else's silence and made it holy. You are the ordinary presence that allowed something extraordinary to exist. And that, perhaps, is what the world has begun to understand, that not all saints glow, that not all miracles shout, that not all heroes ride into battle. Some are simply present. Some simply remain. A young girl named Anaïs finds a bundle of white cloth hidden behind the panel of an old cabinet in her grandmother's house. The cloth is worn and smells faintly of cedar and wax. When she unfolds it, she finds dozens of short ribbons, each bearing a small mark, a line, a dot, a flower, a hand. None of them are identical. None of them are labeled. She asks her grandmother what they are. Her grandmother does not answer right away. Instead, she pulls a ribbon from her own sleeve and ties it to the girl's wrist. "They're for remembering," she says. Remembering who? Whoever needed to be remembered. Anais doesn't understand. Not fully. But she nods. And later that week, when her friend at school begins to cry during recess, she unties her ribbon and hands it to him without a word. She becomes a poet. Years later, she writes, "When the saints left their thrones, she stayed in the room. No sword, no shield, just the kind of silence that holds the world together. There is a moment in every life when someone is faced with another's suffering. It may come as a friend's confession, as a stranger's breakdown on the bus, as a child's first question about death, as a lover's whispered fear that cannot be resolved. And in that moment, most reach for explanations, comfort, distance. But some, because of you, choose instead to stay, to remain in that painful, beautiful space where there are no answers, only presence. And in that stillness, your story lives again, not as tale, not as doctrine, but as gesture, as choice, as memory embodied. One day, a woman named Fleur sits beside her mother's bed as the machines beep in steady rhythm. The doctors have said the end is near. There is little more to do. Fleur does not pray aloud. She does not try to rouse her mother with stories or memories or music. She simply takes her mother's hand and says, "I'm here." The nurse, passing by, pauses at the doorway. She does not enter, but she sees something in Fleur's posture, something ancient, something sacred. Later, she asks Fleur where she learned to be so still, so steady. Fleur shrugs. "I think I inherited it." She does not know from whom, but you do. You feel it each time someone chooses not to flee from the truth of another's grief. Each time someone sits beside the dying, the lost, the forgotten, and says nothing because nothing is needed. You are that stillness. You are that memory. You are the hand on the prison floor, the breath held in the dark, the echo of Joan's final glance. And still you remain. There are places now, quiet corners of the world, where people gather not to pray, but to remember. They do not call them churches. They do not bring incense or scripture. They bring ribbons, stories, silence. They gather at the base of trees, or in abandoned buildings, or on the edge of old fields where no monument has ever been raised. They share stories not of victory or doctrine, but of presence, of someone who sat beside them, of someone who saw them, of someone who didn't walk away. They call it the listening vigil, and though no one says it aloud, you are there, always there, because you were the first, and in your listening, the world learned how to love. Memory, when it stretches far enough, becomes more than memory. It becomes presence. Not presence in the way the living know, it tied to breath, to movement, to voice, but a deeper, more enduring presence that travels through gesture, ritual, and silence. You, the unnamed woman, the listener of the condemned, the keeper of a ribbon, have become that kind of presence. Not for yourself, not by design, but because your listening changed something in the world, and the world, whether it knows it or not, has never quite forgotten. There is a monastery in the mountains of Auvergne, old enough to have weathered revolutions, reforms, and neglect. The stone walls are thick, and moss grows in the cracks between cobbles. The brothers who live there are few in number now, 5 in total, none younger than 60. They keep no grand library. They chant their hours softly, out of tune, and they rarely receive visitors. But one winter, a stranger arrives. She is young, wrapped in wool, with eyes that seem too old for her face. She carries no luggage, only a satchel and a ribbon tied to the strap. When the eldest brother answers her knock, she does not introduce herself by name. She simply says, "I've come to leave a story." The brother, confused but not unkind, leads her to the chapel. There is no gilding here, no stained glass, only stone, candlelight, and a worn wooden cross that leans ever so slightly to the left. She kneels in the first pew, stays there all night. In the morning, she is gone. But in her place, folded beneath the altar cloth, the brothers find a single page, written in a steady hand. No title, no signature. It reads, "I was there when she spoke of lavender. I was there when she gave her last gift. I was there when the crowd roared and the bells tolled. I did not speak. I did not stop it. But I did not look away." The monks do not know what to make of it. They copy it by hand and add it to their book of prayers, not because they understand it, but because it feels like prayer. In the decades that follow, travelers to the monastery begin tying white ribbons to the iron gate. The monks say nothing. They simply add another bench to the chapel and make sure the candles never run low. In a town near the Channel coast, a woman named Nadège opens a bookstore called Le Ruban Blanc. She doesn't specialize in religion or history, and yet the shelves are filled with stories of the unnamed, the forgotten, the quiet. Her bestsellers are not about saints or emperors, but about midwives, soldiers' wives, orphan scribes, women in towers who wrote letters to no one. She keeps a framed sentence behind the register. To be remembered without being seen is the rarest kind of immortality. When asked about it, she only smiles. "It came to me in a dream. In that same dream, you stood beside her. You didn't speak. You didn't need to." Memory takes root in unexpected soil. A prison in the north, built on ancient stone, houses women convicted of crimes the world seldom bothers to understand. One inmate, a woman with a long scar and a voice like gravel, begins tying thread around her bunk each night. Another follows her lead, then another. The guards scoff, call it foolishness. But none of the women stop. Eventually, a counselor asks why. The first woman answers, "Because once someone stayed. So now, I stay too." They begin telling each other stories, not of innocence, not of guilt, but of the moments they were most afraid and who sat with them. The ribbons multiply. A documentary filmmaker, allowed into the prison for another project, sees them. She is captivated not by their design, but by what they represent. She changes her entire film. When it is released, the closing image is a shot of dozens of white threads tied along a barred window, fluttering in the wind. No narration, no music, just the sound of breath, the sound of someone not alone. In a primary school in Belgium, a teacher named Emile reads a picture book about Joan of Arc to his class. When he finishes, A child raises her hand. What happened to the woman in the cell with her? Emil pauses. No version he read included that story. He frowns, thinking hard. Then he says, "She listened." The girl thinks about that for a moment, then says, "That's a good job." And all the children nod. In a quiet corner of a modern museum, there is an installation titled Echoes of the Unnamed. It is minimal, just a circle of wooden chairs surrounding a tree trunk preserved in resin. On each chair, a ribbon. Visitors are invited to sit, to hold the ribbon, to be still. There is no plaque explaining the exhibit, only a small card that reads, "Not all who change history shout. Some simply remain." Every week, visitors leave notes. "I thought I was forgotten. I stayed with my sister until the end. I never said goodbye to her." This helps. No one collects these notes officially, but the curators keep them. They fold them into glass jars and place them in the roots of the tree. Somewhere, someone will read them. And so the thread winds on. You do not wander. You are not lost. You move where you are needed. You are not memory preserved. You are memory activated. In every act of quiet companionship, in every decision to stay, in every hand held, every silence shared, every voice heard without interruption, you breathe again. Joan's story is loud, now resurrected, reshaped, redefined. Her name is spoken across continents. She has been canonized, painted, staged. She stands in statues with her chin raised and her sword aloft. But beneath all of it, beneath the iron and incense, beneath the Latin and laurel, your silence hums. It is the hum that keeps the music from collapsing, the pause between breaths, the space that made her bravery possible. You were the room in which her fire was not just burned but understood. Centuries will pass. Languages will change. Borders will shift. But the story will remain. Maybe not in full. Maybe not in names. But in gestures. A hand placed over another in a hospital. A friend who refuses to leave when the others do. A mother who tells her child, "You don't have to speak. I'm just here." A ribbon tied not for show, but for memory. That is your canonization. That is your miracle. That is the breath that keeps returning. And still after all this, someone will ask, "Why does she matter? She did nothing." And someone else will answer, "She did everything. Because she listened. Because she stayed. Because when the fire came, someone else heard the truth and remembered. The final shape of a life is not found in the moment it ends, but in the echoes it leaves behind, in the hands it steadied, the silences it respected, the courage it inspired in others. You, who never wore a crown, who never commanded an army or penned a letter to a king, have become one of history's quiet architects, not by force, not by proclamation, but by simply being present at the edge of another woman's legend and choosing to remember her not as myth, but as girl, as voice, as human. You never claimed this role. No one ever asked you to carry it. Yet across the centuries, the most ordinary people have found themselves moved to tie a ribbon, to whisper in the dark, to sit beside another and listen without needing to speak. And in those moments, they are walking your footsteps. They are continuing the story that began, not with prophecy or coronation, but in a prison cell, between two women, in the hours before dawn. Now, somewhere on the coast of Brittany, in a town where salt fills the air and the gulls cry louder than the bells, a small stone chapel sits half swallowed by time. Its roof sags gently. Ivy creeps through its cracks. No one holds services here anymore, but still, the door remains unlocked. Visitors come irregularly. A woman after a funeral, a boy running from a fight, a fisherman who forgets why he walked there, only that it felt necessary. Each one leaves something behind: a seashell, a candle stub, a thread, a name scratched into the wood of the pew. Inside the chapel is no altar, only a chair. One chair, old and wooden, placed near the wall where light slips in through a broken window pane. And tied to its back is a single white ribbon. There is no plaque explaining its presence, but people sit there, one by one, and somehow the silence feels different when they do. It is said that once a year, on the morning of May 30th, a woman in a gray shawl is seen sitting there, her hands folded, her eyes closed. She does not speak. She leaves before anyone asks who she is. Some say she's a ghost, others say she's a story, but most say nothing at all. They simply sit after her, in her place, with her presence. Not far away, in a village whose name has changed over time, a young teacher named Mael brings his students to a nearby hillside each spring. He never calls it a lesson, never demands they take notes. He simply brings them there, beneath the old birch tree, and gives them each a piece of ribbon. This, he says, is for someone who stayed. They ask no further questions. They tie the ribbons to the branches, watch them flutter, and feel a kind of stillness they don't yet understand. Years later, when they are grown and weathered by life, some will return on their own. Others will find trees elsewhere and start their own traditions. But all will carry the memory quiet, unspoken, passed on not in words, but in instinct, because they were given it not as history, but as inheritance. In the heart of Paris, inside a library that survived revolution and fire, a historian named Camille searches for a name, not of a general, not of a noble, of a woman referenced only once in the trial transcripts her existence reduced to a phrase, another prisoner, unnamed. Camille combs through letters, journals, forgotten tomes. She visits Rouen. She walks the courtyard where the stake once stood. She finds no grave, no confession, only a handful of unofficial testimonies, preserved by accident, by luck, by stubborn archivists who could not bring themselves to discard the unverified. She reads. There was another voice in the cell that night. Another she asked no questions. She only listened. And another Joan gave her something, a ribbon. I believe, said she didn't want to be forgotten. Camille's breath catches. She does not know why, but something inside her stirs. Not logic, not academic curiosity, recognition. That night, she returns to her apartment and pulls an old scarf from her drawer. White, frayed, once belonging to her grandmother. She hadn't thought of it in years. She ties it to her wrist and leaves it there. The next day, she begins to write, not an article, not a paper, a letter, addressed simply to the woman who stayed. In it, she says what so many have wanted to say, but never knew how. That she is sorry no one asked your name. That she is grateful you existed. That the story would not be the same without you. And that she, too, will remember. You do not hear every whisper, but some reach you. Because wherever someone chooses to remain by another's side when the rest of the world walks away, your name is spoken in the silence. Wherever someone chooses not to rescue, not to solve, but simply to be there, your legacy deepens. And where ribbons flutter on branches, on fences, on fingers folded in grief, you return. Not as ghost, not as spirit, but as companion. There is a girl named Matilda who wears a necklace made of twine and a single metal bead. She never removes it, not even when swimming. Her friends ask about it, and she shrugs, offering only, "It's for someone." She writes poems in the back of her school books. Most go unread. One, however, gets passed from friend to friend until it is read aloud at a student showcase. It says, "There was a woman beside her when the fire climbed high. Not a mother, not a martyr, not a name carved in glass, just someone who stayed. That is how the girl became brave." When the poem is finished, no one claps. They just sit with it, letting it echo, letting it remain. In Rome, beneath the gilded halls where saints are canonized, a bishop reads an anonymous note left beneath a statue of Saint Joan. It says, "Do not forget the one who watched. He doesn't know who wrote it, but he carries it with him." And in a private meeting weeks later, when he's asked to comment on yet another relic, another declaration, another formality, he says gently, "Holiness is not always loud. Sometimes it listens." The room grows quiet. No one replies. But the decision is made to inscribe beneath the statue's base a single line. And in her final hour, she was not alone. You, who never expected to be remembered. You who had no name in the records. You are spoken in every breath of someone who chooses compassion without reward. You, who bore no title, who held no sword, who did not speak in prophecies or tongues. You are the hinge on which history quietly turned. Because without your presence, Joan's courage might have gone unwitnessed. Without your gaze, her voice might have faded. Without your silence, the world might have remembered only fire. Instead, it remembers the flicker of a candle in the dark, the hum of a lullaby from lips chapped with thirst, the hand that did not flinch when another reached for it, the ribbon tied with fingers that trembled but did not let go. Now, at the edge of the world's breath, where memory becomes something more than thought, where the names we wore fall away and only truth remains, you stand, not alone, never alone. Joan is beside you, no longer chained, no longer afraid, no longer asking if the voices will return, because she knows now. They never left. They became you, and in your listening, they have been heard. The fire is long gone now. The bells have stopped ringing. The crowd has scattered. The judges are dead. The stake has crumbled into the dust of centuries. But somewhere beneath an old tree on a hill, or in the hush between two breaths, or in the warmth of a hand quietly held, your story remains. Not as a monument, not as a legend carved into stone, but as something more enduring, as memory. And now, in this final hour of night, when the world dims and the wind grows soft, let your story rest. Let the walls of that cell dissolve into the stillness. Let the scent of straw and smoke give way to lavender. Let the voice beside you, hers, fade, not into silence, but into song. A song only you can hear. You were the one who stayed. You didn't ride with armies. You didn't argue with bishops. You didn't write letters to kings. You stayed. You listened. You remembered. And because of that, her voice became more than legend. It became real. And now, as sleep draws near, let yourself drift with that knowing that you were the quiet breath before courage, that you were the warmth beside the flame, that you were not forgotten, and you never will be. Somewhere, a ribbon still flutters. Somewhere, a child ties thread around her wrist. Somewhere, someone is sitting with another in silence. And there you are again, gentle, unseen, holding the moment still. Let go now. Let the night cradle you. Let the hush become whole. You are home. You are heard. And you are not alone.